Hi, my name's Tom. I make videos here about the energy transition and the response that we could have to climate change, and I work with people and organisations to help reduce emissions across the country. I've just watched Rachel Reeves' budget speech so that you don't have to. And why have I watched it live today? Well, partly because there have been lots of rumours and a great deal of speculation about what might be announced in the budget today. How that might affect our energy bills and how it could impact on low carbon technology more broadly. Speculation around some things that seem helpful to the energy transition and others that seem will slow things down. There has been rumour about a reduction in levies and VAT on energy, rumour of a reduction of grants through the border upgrade scheme, and rumour of a pay per mile tax on electric vehicles, all of which could impact on the transition. But until today, this was all speculation. So what has actually been announced? How will it affect the cost of living for all of us? And how will it affect decarbonisation across our economy? Okay, so the first big news is on energy bills. And I suggest that this is good news for the energy transition. The changes that have been announced today included the removal of the eco scheme costs and other legacy costs, notably the remaining renewables obligation costs from and moving those away from electricity bills. My estimate is that this could reduce rates that we pay by about 13%, which could be about a 3.5p reduction at the price cap rates. In the budget, Rachel Reeves suggested this would provide an average bill payer saving of £150, which is a bit more than I calculate on the price cap, so maybe they're making some other changes too that haven't been announced in the detail of the budget, and that could include feed-in tariffs and the payments that are on electricity bills for feed-in tariffs moving to general taxation. But in reducing the levies on electricity, the government are closing what we call the spark gap, so the ratio between gas and electricity rates that we currently pay, which is a really good thing. Again, looking at price cap rates that from the new year are supposed to be 27.69 pence per kilowatt hour for electricity and 5.93 pence per kilowatt hour for gas. This makes electricity per unit 4.67 times more expensive than gas. But with changes to levies, the price cap rate could come down to around 24.2 pence per kilowatt hour, and this would make electricity only 4.1 times more expensive than gas. And yeah, this isn't world changing, but it means a heat pump would need to have an efficiency of around 370% to break even with an efficient gas boiler on the price cap. And that's not outrageous, it's not unbelievable for a heat pump, but it could be fairly high for many. I should take this time to make a little side note. If you're a heat pump owner on a price cap, you really shouldn't be. You should switch to a time of use tariff as soon as possible so that you'll save on your costs and on your bills. My rate on a time of use tariff over the last 12 months has been 18.2 pence per kilowatt hour, which is only 3.1 times more expensive than gas. And a heat pump would only needed to have an efficiency of 276% to break even. In reality, I'm saving a lot. If the 13% reduction in bills means that time of use rates are reduced as well, which I assume would be the case, then even better. A 2.4 pence per kilowatt hour saving for me, and that break-even efficiency would need to be significantly lower. Many heat pump owners would save a lot at those rates. And it's a similar story for electric vehicles. Charging at home with a 13% reduction on rates would make EVs that bit cheaper to run. Many EV owners with a home charger would already be charging at very low rates, which makes EV driving very cheap. But if an overnight rate of 8 pence was cut by 13%, that would become 7 pence and would mean that EVs are roughly 2p per mile to run. Given that there may be future rises in fuel duty, again suggested today at the budget, that makes driving electric substantially cheaper, because an efficient petrol car could be around 12.5 pence to run today. But, and this is probably the next piece of big news that had already been rumoured, there's going to be a new pay per mile tax on electric vehicles. So what's been announced is that they're going to add 3 pence per mile to pure electric vehicles and 1.5 pence per mile on plug-in hybrids from 2028. And this is an attempt to stem the loss in revenue for the exchequer from the reduction in fuel duty as we transition away from petrol and diesel. And although this seems fairly disappointing, and it seems it could begin disincentivizing the switch to EVs, it does still make some sense. As we see around 35,000 new electric vehicles on the road every month this year, That will begin to reduce the number of fossil vehicles driving around, and therefore the amount of petrol and diesel sold. And as the cost of fuel duty per litre is about 58 pence, or about 5 or 6 pence per mile for an efficient petrol car, that income will need to be made up elsewhere. Fossil cars are bad for the environment. They're bad for air quality and therefore our health, and driving them causes damage to roads and impacts on communities. And although electric vehicles are significantly less bad for the environment and for air quality, they still damage roads and they still impact on communities. Driving any car is bad. So it makes some sense to disincentivise it a little bit. 3 pence per mile at 10,000 miles a year would be £300 in tax, coupled with the fact that electric vehicles are now subject to electric vehicle excise duty of £195. EV owners will need to be ready for an increase of £495 of tax, which isn't great. So it might be slightly cheaper to charge a car because of the reduction in electricity levies, but there's this new tax on electric vehicles that we weren't hoping for. An analysis from the OBR suggests that this could reduce the number of electric vehicles sold in the UK by 440,000 cars over the next 5 years, which with some really simple quick maths is about a 20% reduction on current sales. And that does seem like a bit of a kick in the teeth for the energy transition. Although government are still wanting people to transition away from fossil vehicles, and it isn't all bad news. The EV grant that gives some money off new cars, about a 10% discount on some cars, has been extended by 1.3 billion, which means it will keep running until 2030. And again, the OBR thinks this will increase sales by 130,000 over the next 5 years. So we're limiting the impact of the pay per mile tax, and we'll see how that pans out in the next few years. But what else? Well, there was nothing in the budget about changes to the boiler upgrade scheme, and those changes had been rumours that it could be changed to a means-tested grant. We know from the government announcement last week that the boiler upgrade scheme will be extended to air-to-air heat pumps as well, or what we might know already as air conditioners, as well as heat batteries. But I kind of expected some news today about a reduction in the wider scheme. And this hasn't been announced. And maybe that's because it's too small a policy to get a mention in the budget, and maybe because changes will come as part of updates to what the government are planning through the Warm Homes Plan. But for now, we can still get £7,500. Anyone can get £7,500 for air source heat pumps at home. There was mention of continued support for nuclear power development and for renewable energy, but I don't think that's really news. There was some mention about funding for rail infrastructure, a freeze in rail fares and an extension to the bus fare cap, which again, if those policies can incentivise people out of cars, they're really good things. But there was also mention of investment in roads with the new Lower Thames crossing, a new tunnel on the east of London, and more roads simply is bad for our emissions. There were rumoured changes to salary sacrifice schemes on the Cycle to Work scheme and potentially on EV leases, but they don't appear to have been announced today. But again, they may be in the detail. They have changed some rules on salary sacrifice for pensions. And then the final point on the budget for this video from me. If the eco scheme has been cancelled in full, even though some reports say it was ineffective or actually bad for those that received a grant through it, this was a scheme that was intended to upgrade homes for those in risk of fuel poverty. So cancelling that scheme really does seem disappointing and potentially seems short-sighted. But there does appear to be faith put in the government's Warm Homes Plan. So they may be saving on the eco scheme to reduce costs for all of us, and they may be planning to fund upgrade of housing stock from somewhere else in the budget. Okay, so conclusions. Reducing electricity costs even slightly is a positive thing, and removing some of the green levies from bills will really help with the political conversation when it comes to net zero. Although contracts for difference and the capacity market that are sometimes incorrectly called renewable subsidies seem to still be on electricity bills. So yeah, there's still some policy costs there that people might complain about. But in making electricity cheaper, this benefits all of us. But it also makes the case for switching from fossil fuels in heating and transport more attractive. It makes the financial case for solar PV and batteries a bit less attractive, but the grid is already pretty low emissions. Heat and transport are the big challenges that this helps with. Adding a pay per mile tax on electric vehicles could disincentivise driving, which is a good thing, but also potentially disincentivises moving to electric vehicles, which is a bad thing. I can imagine some boring Nigel Farage statement suggesting that now EVs are more expensive to run, which is still not true. They would still be less than half the cost to run than a very efficient petrol car. And the grant that basically gives 10% off electric vehicles is still in place and has been extended for a couple of years. I think that's it. The reduction in electricity costs, I think, is impactful and meaningful, particularly because it closes that spark gap between gas and electricity. Other than that, and the pay per mile tax, I don't think the budget had much for low carbon advocates to be worried about or really to celebrate. We'll see what eventually comes out in the wash as things are communicated more broadly. I hope you found this video relevant and interesting. If you did, please do subscribe. If you wanted to support my work, please do join the channel. And if you wanted to work with me on a variety of things linked to decarbonisation and net zero strategy, please do get in touch with me via my website sb-energy.co.uk. Thank you for watching.